Good morning, New Beginnings Life Church. We're so glad you're here to continue to grow with us today. First, we're going to have some important announcements. Then we're going to have some awesome praise and worship music. And then Brother Levi is going to bring an awesome message today. Don't forget to put your change in the jar. It helps support our youth. Check out our board for everything you need to know. Please place your tithes and offerings in the envelopes and put them in the buckets in the back. If you'd like to make an offering, you can mark what it's for on the envelope. Today after church, we have a potluck lunch, so bring your appetites. Tonight, Mark Palmer's class will be at 6 p.m. Next Saturday, on the 6th, we'll be having men's breakfast. Women's craft day will be next Sunday after service on the 7th. All right, let's get ready to worship.
This week, I was pondering God and the Bible, and God told me something very, very spectacular and very suddenly. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody say this or word this way before. And normally when God shows you something new, it's because there's about to be a new situation where we need to use it. So what I hope to do today, because I like to give comfort messages. I like everybody to walk out like, oh, that felt good, you know. This isn't that. But as I pondered that with God after I had this, and he kind of told me, I went the way of Gideon. I don't think I should have, but I did. But he told me I should preach that, and I was like, if this is really you, God, can I leave this blanket out, and if it doesn't get all moldy, then I'll know it's you. You know, I kind of did that number, and I was like, yeah, I'll just kind of wait. And all I did, with no context or anything, all I did was just tell my wife what he said, and she was like, you need to preach that. It was like, oh, well, there's my blanket. Okay. Yeah, no way. No, she's the blanket that didn't get dew on it. But what I'm going to do here, and this is kind of how I want everybody to understand this, the Word of God is a weapon against the enemy. And we know this, we hear about the armor of God, you know, and I believe specifically that the reason that he revealed this is because, as it says in the Bible, the spirit of the Antichrist is already among us. And I believe that there is a tactic that Satan is going to use in these coming days against us, against his faithful. And it's great to have all of the armor of God. It's great to have the shield of faith to hold it off. It's great to have the helmet of salvation to make sure your skull doesn't cave in. It's great to have those things. But if you don't have the sword, that battle is going to go on a lot longer than it has to. So we're going to be blacksmiths today, and we're going to look at 3 specific people under a very specific microscope. And what I hope to do is take these pieces and put them together, and from this we're going to forge a sword. And I'm planning on giving this sword to you guys, so that we don't fall into this. That's God's job. So we've got a man named Moses, and I'm just gonna run right into it. Moses was born into a corrupt government. I can feel the eye rolls. Oh, he's going to go political. No, I'm going to go biblical. Let's get a sword, okay? Sometimes you got to break down some dirt to get one. Actually carbon, but we won't get into metallurgy at the moment. Moses was born into a corrupt government. Pharaoh is what all of us could call a complete sociopath, right? First off, he uses antebellum slavery, which we all just immediately know you've got to have some kind of sociopath up here to do. But he's doing it with these Jews, and then he kind of looks at the Jews and he says, you know what, there's too many of them. Kill all the boys that they have. You know, If they have a girl, okay, fine. But if they have a boy, just kill the baby, throw it to the side, and we'll move on. This is a corrupt government. Pharaoh is a corrupt leader. Many of us actually, well, at least I thought this. Maybe you didn't. But, it's like, why can't Moses be born before the corruption happens so that he can then stop the corruption from ever happening? That's what I want to say, and the answer to this is very simple. God didn't think it was necessary, and I'm wrong to think it was. That's the simple answer to that. Moses eventually flees the government, and what you're going to see as we talk about these three people is this early story is the same for all three of them. They're born into a corrupt government. They eventually have to run away from that corrupt government. And then eventually, they'll come back under a new leader, but not into a now not corrupt government. So Moses is born. He flees because, and also of importance, Moses is a part of that corrupt government. He is the son of Pharaoh by adoption, but he is the son of Pharaoh. And he doesn't like slavery either because Moses is not a sociopath. So in his anger at this, he ends up killing a man. And Pharaoh tries to kill him. I think they left that out of the movie Prince of Egypt, right? No, Pharaoh goes after Moses. And this is important when we talk about fleeing the government here, because Pharaoh is actually intent on Moses' death, so Moses leaves. With all three of our people, that's what you're going to see happen. So the idea that, okay, if there's a corrupt government, we can just run away, actually is going to fall short here. But that's not the focus of what we're going to deal with here. He comes back after that Pharaoh dies. Now, the reason is because that Pharaoh is after his specific life. Moses did not leave and wait until the government fixed itself and come back. He waited until the guy that was after him died, and then he came back, right? Under a new Pharaoh. And in fact, we know that so specifically because when Moses does come back, it says after Pharaoh died, the new Pharaoh took over, and that's when the Jews started to cry out. It wasn't the Pharaoh that chased Moses. It was the new one. So corruption completed. So Moses is doing this thing, and he sees a bush. We know the story, right? He sees the bush. He walks up, and the bush says Moses, and Moses flips out in the most appropriate way possible. He shouts the Hebrew phrase for ready for duty, sir. I don't know if I would do that if a burning bush was talking to me, but Moses did, so that's pretty cool. Can you imagine hearing a voice out of nowhere and just being like, all right, I'm ready, what do you want me to do? Right? Anyway, and God gives Moses a job. Now this is where we are. This is where we want to be. God gives Moses a job. What job does God give Moses? Ponder that for a second. Will you give me Exodus 3:19 and 20? So God talks to Moses, and he says what? I want you to set my people free, right? Okay, hold off. He says, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. I'm going to reword this just real quickly. Moses' job is not to let the people go. That's Pharaoh's job. God's job is to make him. Moses' job, read it, then he will let you go. Moses' job is to ask the corrupt government for permission and wait until they give it. Wow. That blew my mind sideways and upways because that's not what Americans think. And I'm not insulting America. I'm an American if you didn't know that. But we have a tendency. We are a government that was founded on rebellion. So what does that mean? Well, that means we have a tendency to be rebellious. Those things travel down through the generations, and we know that. We have a tendency in America to be rebellious. I mean, they just tried to ask us to wear a mask. I fought them tooth and nail. I know I did. I actually, thanks to this, God put that under my understanding, and I've been wearing a mask more often at work because I had a habit of just forgetting it. And I was wrong. So I'll be the first to say that. God says, it's my job to judge the nations. It is my job to judge the nations. It is your job to submit to authority. That's the job you were given. But what if the authority is bad? What if Pharaoh is like a monster? Well, Pharaoh is a monster. God will deal with him. You submit to authority. Right? When God establishes a leader, he establishes the leader and he will deal with him. Whether what he does is right or wrong, it's God's job. That was where I came up with the title. That's God's job. It's not ours. Our job is to let the government know what God wants and then wait for their permission to do it. So let's see how Pharaoh reacts to this and just see how deep does this go, right? Now, first off, what I'm going to have up here is actually an interesting, because there's a question in some of our minds, and I'm going to bring this up later, but I want you to read it right now in Exodus 3:21. Why on earth should I have to wait for Pharaoh's permission? We can just leave. Did you know that God can split oceans in half? Let's just leave. Let's not wait for Moses' permission. God has a bigger and better plan for them than that. So you see, if Moses waits for Pharaoh to let him go, God says, I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed towards this people, as in his people, the Hebrews, so that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. See, God says, not only am I going to take you on a trip, but if you will wait for the corrupt government's permission, I know this sounds just mind-numbing, but if you will wait for permission and do it like I said, those people will provision your trip. They'll give you a free van, I'm told. And not the crappy one either. Right? God will supply the journey, but he asks us to do something. He asks us to submit to authority. Now, does that mean if the authority tells us to do something horrific that we just say, okay, and do it? Well, I didn't put this in there, but during Moses' birth, Pharaoh gives the order to kill every male child born. How do the midwives react? They don't do it. You see, because that is against God. You cannot do what is against God because we work for a different government. If a government asks you to do something truly evil, God will protect you when you decide not to do it. But you will do it with respect. When we do it with anger, it doesn't work out the way we want because we have a wrong motive. What is it? James, he says, those of you that don't have because you don't ask, and when you do ask, you ask with wrong motives. Right? We have to do this rightly, but no. Now, continuing on though, what's Pharaoh's reaction to this? So Moses shows up and he does some really, really, really cool political stuff. Like I would love to get into why the staff turns into a snake and what that means. But basically, I'm gonna throw all of that to the side for now. And I'm just going to say, Moses says, God wants you to let us go. And he doesn't even say permanently. He says we want to go for 3 days to worship in the wilderness. That's all he asked for. And Pharaoh, being a wonderful leader, says, not only no, but now I'm going to make you make bricks with no materials, and I'm going to punish you if you don't fit the quota. So, see, that was sarcasm. Pharaoh is a terrible leader, and he's not changing anytime soon. Well, that's a stupid law. Wouldn't you say? You're going to ask us to make the same bricks with nothing just because I didn't even ask. He did. That's a stupid law. American logic, that's a stupid law. I'm not going to do it. Because that's a stupid law. That was my mentality with the masks, and I apologize publicly and before God. I was wrong. Let's see the godly reaction, shall we? Then Moses went back to, wait. Uh-oh. Oh, I forgot. No, we got to do that first. I'm sorry. Hold on. This is great. I wrote this on the side. Okay, this is just a trivia question to how important submission is to our Christian lives, okay? What did Moses do after God told him to go to Egypt? Just ponder it. I'm not going to ask anybody to say anything out loud. What did he do? This is so cool, right? If God told me, I know it's still up there, but that's all right. If God told me, I want you to go to northern Scotland and preach Christ to the fishermen, I would go home, pack, say, wife, we're leaving, God said so. I would go to my boss and say, sorry, I'm out. I mean, wouldn't you? If God talked to you through a bush, but what does Moses do? The godly answer. He went back to his father-in-law and boss, by the way, it's his sheep that he tends, and he asked permission to leave. How deep does this go? All the way down. Moses has orders from God to go to Egypt and do all of this straight from God. What does he do? He goes to his boss and he says, I talked to God today. Would you please let me out of my contract? What would have happened if Jethro had said no? Moses wouldn't have gone. Because that's the godly reaction. And that's challenging. That is hard for me. I know it's hard for a lot of us in here. But submission to authority is the godly way. But Jethro doesn't say he has to stay. You know why? Because it's still God's plan. He's still going to make sure you get the permission you need. Right? So now we're in Egypt. Pharaoh has a reaction and he makes a stupid law. How do they react to the stupid law? Exodus 5:12. So the people scattered all over the Egypt to gather stubble to use for straw. See? Pharaoh made a stupid law. The Hebrews continued to do what they were supposed to do. God did not ask them to follow to not follow a stupid law. If Pharaoh spoke, they did it. And they will continue to wait for God's judgment of Egypt so that they can get permission. I've got 5:22 up. So Moses returns to the Lord after this happens, and he says, why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Did you send me to make their lives worse? Right? Not once does Moses say, you know what, guys, let's just go. Let's just go. God is with us because we're in the right. If we go, he'll take care of us anyway. No. And by the way, maybe he wouldn't have. Because the job is that Moses has, wait for permission. And that's the only job Moses has got. Occasionally Moses will lift up his hand or something. But that's it. God's job, I will take care of Pharaoh. You submit to the authority that you have. Right? But Moses goes to God and he's like, this is terrible. Nobody is saying that you don't have a right to be honest with God about your feelings. Sometimes it just looks bad, and God is okay to listen to you on that. But trust him. Trust him first. Here's the challenge. Is this where we stop as Americans? How many times have we talked about, well, I tried to just do the right thing, but then it just felt like everything got worse. So I just went back to the old way. Is this where we stop? Do we stop before? Well, I mean, do we stop? Is this where you stop? Or will you stay the course and hold on? Right? God responds to Moses. And this is a little while later, but he responds to Moses. And he says, Exodus 6:1, then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to him. The miracle is coming. You got to wait, and you got to do what God asked you to do, which is submit. That's the answer. Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go, and because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of this country. You got to read that in Hebrew, man. It's great. It's so great. B'yad hezakah. It feels like, Dad's hand coming up. Like it's time to share with Billy. I don't want to share. Right? B'yad hezakah. Okay, all right. I'm going to make him. Is it Moses' job to make him do the right thing? No, it's Moses' job to tell him what the right thing is, and then wait. But at this point, God says, because of me, he will do what I want him to do. It is never part of this diagram at all. It is never part of this entire discussion. Because, like I said, Americans have an issue with submission. They didn't back then, not the way we do now, right? It's never even suggested that they just leave without permission. It's not even part of the discussion that he should have to submit to this corrupt government. It's never even brought up. God says, leave the corrupt government to me. I will do a much better job taking care of it than you will anyway. You see, guys, we're in a place right now where we have seen America's rebellious side show up. A little bit, right? Well, that's what the world looks like. Congratulations. When Jesus says, my kingdom isn't from here, that's because when we submitted to Christ, our kingdom, it doesn't look like this. Where we are going does not look like people rioting in the streets. It doesn't look like that. It will be different. It's our job to show the world what it will look like. And we can't do that if we decide to behave just like they do. It's our job to show the world what the actual kingdom looks like. And what they will do is look at this one and go, you know what? This one's not that great. I mean, there's one thing that everybody in America agrees on right now. It's bad right now. We need to make it better. Our kingdom's already the best. Let's show it to them. Let's show the people what our kingdom looks like as ambassadors of Christ on this globe. Let's not act like them. So how did Moses act? He told them what was wrong. but he submitted. And if we're submitting outwardly, and this is a real challenge, if we're submitting outwardly but not in our heart, then we are still not rightly showing the kingdom of God. If you say, oh, that old, I'm not going to say president, but let's just say mayor, and I'll just pick one from a video game so that I'm not actually mad at a real person up here. But let's just say, oh, that mayor, he's just an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But I won't say that. I'm not supposed to say that, so I'm not going to say that because I want to reflect God to the world. If it's in here, it will come out and people will see it. That's what this sword today is for, because the devil will come at us against our authority figures, our teachers, our authority figures. I don't care how bad they are at their jobs. And I know because I'm a whale of a bad job. But our job, I lost it. It's gone. Where'd it go? I don't know. Yeah, I know, right? I started thinking about how terrible I am at my job, and then it was just death. No, but listen. What we are here to do is submit to that authority and show the world. Oh, yeah. If it's in your heart, God is going to come to you and say, that guy's an idiot. I don't have to do this homework. He only assigns it because he just wants to keep us busy so he can play on Facebook because he's too old for Instagram anyway. Right? The devil will come at all of us with that in our lives. If it's in here, it will come out and you will still not reflect God rightly. Jesus said that if you commit murder in your heart, you've already committed it. Right? So this sword, this weapon, when the enemy comes at you with that weapon or with that attack, my boss is stupid, I'm not going to do this. Turn back to him and say, it's God's job to judge them. It's my job to submit. That's your weapon. And he can't attack you for too long if you do it. Once he leaves, then you will truly, rightly express God to the world. And I know that's what we all want to do. I mean, we know his kingdom looks great because all any of us have to do is look around us and we realize, there's got to be better. There is. Let's show it to everybody else. Let's look at somebody else. So now we understand what the charge is. Now we understand what the sword is. Now let's find out why. I mean, I get it. I'm supposed to submit to authority, but even bad authority, why? So let's talk to David for a minute. David was, guess what? Born into a corrupt government. I did the math. David becomes king at 30, right? Saul reigned over Israel for 46 years, or 42 years. David wasn't born when Saul became king. Saul was king for 12 years before David was born. David was born into Saul's corrupt monarchy. How corrupt was Saul's monarchy? The corruptest. God removed his spirit from him. You don't get much more corrupt than that, right? So David is born into a corrupt government. Hey, just like Moses, right? All these guys just keep getting put into these corrupt governments. It's weird. I think if you actually look at history, you'll find out that governments are more often corrupt than they aren't. And that's me as a history teacher pointing that out. But it's still not our kingdom. Ours is elsewhere. Just like Moses, David is a part of the government. From a very young age, David fights in their military, only for one battle, but he does kill a giant, so I guess that's good enough. And then he becomes the court musician for Saul, right? He plays music to calm him down when he's having a rage fit, basically, right? So he's still part of the government. And that's so weird to me because when we think of it, we're separate from the government, it's all separated. Well, not really, not in the Bible. It's pretty much like this, right? Now what we've got is David, just like Moses, ticks off Saul. Why? Because he's too good at his job. So Saul actually throws a spear at him while he's playing once. Just, yeah! Take that, musician. Anyway, so David also flees. He doesn't flee the government. And in his case, he can't return back to the corrupt government because when he returns, he is the government. But he flees not the government as a whole. Saul specifically, who is trying to kill him. You're going to see that with all three of these people. Moses, Pharaoh is actually trying to kill him. He leaves. David, the government is actually trying to kill him, the individual. He leaves. Right? David in the wilderness, fleeing from Saul, gets, and I should have put this in quotes in my notes, but you guys won't see it anyway. He gets a divine opportunity. They've taken shelter in a cave, and having taken shelter in this cave, they find that they go really deep into it, and towards the mouth of the cave, there's Saul. Just hanging out. He's a dead man. He doesn't even know they're in there. You sneak up to him. I think that's how stabbing, I don't know. In my world, it's this. You push a button, but I don't know. Stabs him, and he walks away, right? And he's even told by his people, I was telling you, the voice of the enemy, and it is crafty. That's why we need this sword. His own people say, God gave him into your hands, just kill him. Right? So David being David, though, he decides not to kill him, and he just goes to cut a little bit of his robe off so he can show him, I could have killed you, but I didn't, right? So 1 Samuel 24, 4-7. The men said, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Man, how often does Satan use Scripture when he's trying to tempt us? The defense for that is to keep reading, by the way. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Victory, right? Look at this. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut a corner off of his robe. David's not guilty for killing him. Pay attention. All David did was disrespect Saul. That's what cutting his clothing is. He disrespected him. And his conscience, God is tormenting him for it. He is convicted for disrespecting him. Forget killing him. He's convicted by disrespect only. And so he pleads for his life, right? But listen to what he says. He then said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. If you look at that wording there, the thing such as this that he's talking about is cutting his robe, because he's already done it. Right? This isn't things such as this as killing him. This is, I shouldn't have even done this. This small, tiny sign of disrespect was beyond my bounds. I was out of bounds and I should get back in. That's his response to this. Because then he says, or lay my hand on him. That's actually killing him. So he comes out and he tells his men, this was wrong. Killing him is just so much worse. He's actually saying it that far. But what I want to see, and then with these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul, and Saul left the cave and went his way. Right? But I want you to see what he calls Saul here, because this is our answer to why. Why do we have to submit to these bad authorities? Can you give me a little bit of Hebrew up here? English translations, man, they just don't get it. This is what he says. Now, there is another letter, if you were to look this up to test me on this, that's fine. There is another letter at the beginning of this word. It's a preposition, and they all become one word in Hebrew, so I just cut it off to avoid any kind of confusion. But this is what he calls Saul, the evil king, the corrupt ruler, the bad guy, the one that God dismissed and left. Mashiach, Yahweh. Now, I've got a bad accent when I speak in Hebrew, so I'll say that a little bit more like the way we would hear it. Messiah, Yahweh. The Messiah of God. That is the title that David gives Saul, the villain. Mashiach. That's your word right there. It's over here. Mashiach, Yahweh. That one on the left is the name of God. If you ever cared to know that or have that written down, there it is right there. And that's not one of his names like Elohim, like one of his titles. That's his actual name right there. David calls him a Messiah. Now, I'm not saying that he is tying him to Christ necessarily. I would like to overemphasize this, but I really want you to feel the weight of that word and what it means. You see, Messiah is a title, and it does have a meaning. It means chosen by God to do a job, whether you like it or not. Chosen by God to do a job. Mashiach Yahweh. How dare I disrespect the guy that God put in this job? That's what he's saying here. With Christ, we hear Jesus, Messiah, right? Well, same thing. Mashiach, Messiah. He was designed by God, hired by God, contracted by God to do one job, right? And the job is in the name. Yeshua means salvation in Hebrew. So Jesus was the one who was given the job by God to save us. And every kind of amen that deserves, of course. But he is still not pulling any punches with Saul. Saul was chosen by God to be in power. You know how I know? Because he was in power and not one leaf falls that God doesn't give permission. That's how I know that he was chosen by God. So what right does David have to make the assumption that God was wrong? He doesn't, is the right answer. So then we have, he actually leaves. He does deal with Saul. Saul does not get better because Saul's still a bad guy. Doesn't mean he deserves any disrespect. He's still a bad guy, though. So he continues to chase David. And David actually leaves. And I thought this was really neat. Another example of submission. David leaves and he actually goes to the Philistines. He lives with the Philistines for a while. He lives with the actual military enemy of the Israelites. So once again, I did this with Moses. How deep does this submission hole really go? So 1 Samuel 29:8. So the Philistines, David lives there for over a year, and the Philistines are actually going to war against Israel. Oh, well, David shouldn't go then, right? Well, what did the king tell him to do? See, he lives under Philistine jurisdiction. So as long as he's there, the Philistine king is his king. So what does that make him? Mashiach Yahweh, appointed by God. That's what it makes him. And that king says, David, I want you to go to war with me against the Philistine, or against the Hebrews, the Israelites. I want you to go to war with me against your own people. You know who's standing with him on the battlefield? David. He goes to fight a war against his own people because his king asked him to. How deep does this go? How far does submission go? Now, once again, whose job is it to deal with the king of the Philistines? Whose job? It's God's job to deal with the king of the Philistines, not David's. So when the king of the Philistines says, come with me, he says, okay. Right? Infighting among the Philistine army gets so bad, they don't want David to fight with them. And so the king turns to David and says, I'm sorry, you can't fight your own people today. You need to go home. Because God dealt with the problem. It was David's job to submit and wait for God's provision every time. And he did. And David even showed great respect to the king when he told him, sorry, you got to go home, buddy. You can't kill your own brothers and sisters today. He says, but what have I done? What have you found against your servant from the day I came to you until now? Why can't I go and fight against the enemies of my Lord and King? That is the ultimate honor. David's not excited to kill Israelites, guys. We know because he had the opportunity. He's excited to be an appropriate servant to the one God put over him. And he is so panicked that he's been told to go home, not because he wanted to be there, but because in his mind, that means he has not been a good enough servant to the king of the Philistines, and therefore not a good enough servant to God. Whew. I mean, this is challenging stuff. This is hard to apply, but I promise you guys, if you have this sword, God will bless your life. And I know because I've been wielding it this week, and I know it's not a van. But you know why? Because Jonathan's already been wielding this sword. All I did was learn how to make it just yesterday, right? But I have one thing that just I really, really like. And I've always wanted them, and I love having them, and they have always been breaking on me, and I've been wanting ever since the school year started to get a new one, and I simply haven't found a way. This week, I told God, I am sorry for my lack of submission to my authorities, and I have changed. And we were at Walmart, and the jewelry center is on clearance because they're restructuring the store. And I got a brand new Armitron watch for half off. I know that sounds silly to you guys, but it's not to me. This meant a lot to me. David just wants to submit to the rulers that God puts over him. That's it. You know, that's what makes him the best king on the planet. That right there is why when David becomes king, he is the best. Until Jesus, obviously, you know what I mean. On the planet, good thing. God caught me before I said anything stupid. Yeah, on the planet, right? It's because of that. When Samuel comes to the house, David's out with the sheep. Does David know that they came? Maybe, maybe not. But you know what? I think I know something about David's personality. I bet he would have stayed with the sheep anyway because those were his orders. God spared him from having to do something wrong, but he did submit until God did. And just as, what's the end game, right? Well, Saul dies just as God said he would. David is king just like God said he would be, right? God did that. David didn't have to do anything but submit to the authorities God put over him until his provision came. The same thing as it was with Moses. We've got one last person, and I hope I'm not going too long. I'm trying not to. There's a lot here, if you guys can imagine. We could go for weeks on this. But there's one last person we want to talk about. He was born during a corrupt government, and he had to flee from that government for a while too. His name was Jesus. Jesus was born into the Roman Empire. Y'all, I've studied history. I know America has done this thing where like Greece and Rome are like these that's what you want to be. You want to be like them. They were awesome. They were not. They were a violent, corrupt, military, totalitarian dictatorship, and they would take you down for second guessing it. They were not a good government. Period. Exclamation point. And we'll probably see more of that as I continue to explain this. So Jesus was born into a corrupt government, but let's get even more local. Let's not just say Rome. Let's actually get local. Okay, he was born under Herod, another sociopath of history, and sometime later he'll be under Pontius Pilate, another sociopath of history. Right? Yeah, okay, so fine. You don't want to say Rome is corrupt, then let's look at the Israeli government at the time, which is under Roman control. Yeah, it's bad. One difference between Jesus and David and Moses, and it's a small, strange difference, but I would like to explain it because I think it will help you guys understand just how twisted the Roman system is. Jesus is not born as part of their government. He doesn't get raised into their government. And that's one difference between him and David and Moses, because they were. Well, why not? Well, there's a very simple reason for that, other than the fact that Jesus is the Messiah and he had other things to do. He's not Roman. You don't get a job in the government unless you're Roman. You got racism bad, yes, governments that supply racism bad, right? In Rome, if you're not a Roman, you will never be more than an auxiliary. You can work for their military, but you can't even be with their proper legion. You actually get your own unit of people like you, and they send you into the battlefield to go kind of like soften the enemy up before they get the rest of the guys in there. See, Jesus couldn't be part of the military because he had to be Jewish. And in the Roman Empire, that just means you're not in the government. You don't get that privilege. You're not Roman. So how twisted is the Roman government? It's twisted. It's twisted. Jesus also flees the government, just like the other three. He flees to Egypt for one reason that I love, and I didn't realize it. But, you know, isn't it just God to say, because of the situation, I had to send my children to be strangers in Egypt, so when I'm born on earth, I'm going to be a stranger in Egypt too. I'm going to take the same licks that they did. That is 100% Jesus. For him to say, you know, their biggest pain was having to be in Egypt, so I'm going to go stay in Egypt too. I'll be a foreigner in their land just like I made my people be, because God will not put you through anything that he did not first put himself through. What do you think of that? That's so God to care that much. Anyway, why does he flee? Because Herod wants him dead. Herod decides to kill all of the children under 2 years. Well, all of the male children, once again. The female children get spared every time. Congratulations. But not the male children. He kills all of them under 2. And so Jesus has to leave because same thing. The government is after his life personally. When Jesus returns, Herod is dead. It's still Rome. It's still corrupt. It's just they're not looking at him anymore. Right? I want you guys to hear what Jesus says about the high priests. This is a section called the 7 woes. And basically what Jesus is about to do is waylay the Jewish priests for all of their vile practices. I mean, he just lays it on them. Just, woe unto you could mean a lot of different things. I'm not a Greek scholar, but I went ahead and tried to look it up, and there's like 7 different theories on the matter. So I don't have anything. I'm backing off of that because one of them was literally, I feel sorry for you. The other one is literally, you're excommunicated and will burn in hell. So, I mean, I don't know. But woe unto you is what he says, and he lays out every nasty thing they ever do. Every nasty thing. But guess what he says to the Israeli people right before he does it? This is Matthew 23, 1 through 4. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, and to his own disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must be careful to do everything they tell you. Submit to authority. It's like, I would never beat somebody over the head with a Bible, but I think the Bible is beating this over ours. Submit to their authority. That is the first thing Jesus says. And he says it not just to the crowd, but to his own disciples as well. Do what they tell you to do. They are your authority. Submit to them. But, here we go, this is great. Don't do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. That's the lesson. Well, the government did it this way. Like, Donald Trump cheated on his taxes, so I can too, right? It's not what Jesus said. That's not what he said. He said, be careful to submit to them, but don't behave like them. Just because the government says something's right does not mean it is. Just because the government behaves in a certain way does not mean it's okay. It's our jobs as Christians to let them know it's not okay. But it is not our jobs to disrespect them, pass judgment on them, or not submit to their authority. God will deal with them. It's our job to submit. And then I'm telling you, he literally says they seal up heaven against everybody, including themselves. They're corrupt. They put burdens on people's shoulders. I mean, he literally, it's like a chapter of Jesus just ultimately epically roasting the Pharisees. But he starts it off with, submit to them. Matthew 26:47. Let's go to the garden because we've got something here. We've got resisting arrest here. Or possibly violent protest, if you want to call it that. So while he was still speaking, Jesus, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd, armed with swords and clubs, sent from the priests, the chief priests and the elders of the people. And they go to arrest Jesus. Is Jesus being rightfully arrested? Absolutely not. He did nothing wrong. And he's the only person in history I can actually say that about. He did nothing wrong. Are they right to arrest him? No. Is it unjust, corrupt, evil, vile? Yes, every bit of it. And it's not the military that seizes Jesus, it's the church. So not only are they doing the most corrupt thing imaginable, they're doing it in the name of God. Imagine being in that garden when you're Jesus. We arrest you by the authority of you. Yeah, good job, guys. So Peter engages in a little bit of protest. Peter resists arrest a little bit. Peter pulls out his sword and cuts a dude's ear off. Yoink. I think Mark explained this the best way. I think probably the guy ducked. I highly doubt he was aiming for the ear. Well, that's okay, right? Because, if you're not being arrested for the right things, then you should resist. If the government's doing something corrupt, we should resist that, and we should... Well, I can't answer this question for you guys, so I'm going to let Jesus do it if you don't mind. Next verse. Jesus answered, no more of this. No more of this. That's him, not me. No more of this. This is not Jesus' kingdom. Now, we don't have, well, we do, but we cannot expect the world to behave any different than the world behaves. We can't. And we shouldn't. Right? They're going to behave like the world because they're the world. But you're not. If you have submitted yourself to Christ, if you have been saved, if you have been bought by the blood, you're not the world. And God says, enough of this. We are not the rebellers. We submit to the authority of God, and because of that, we submit to the people that he set, and God will deal with them. We will wait, and it will be spectacular. It will be miraculous. On the way here, I heard that song, if the people who are called by his name would humble themselves and come to the Lord, then he would heal their land. Boy, we've all been saying that, but what if the one humbling that we haven't had is by making the decision to put ourselves as judges over the government that God put there? What if the one humbling that we have not done right is that? Humble ourselves It's easy to humble yourself before God. It's not so easy to humble yourself before a president you don't like. Humble yourself. And then God will heal the land, not before. Because he's got to show you how you need to behave. And then he will heal the land. Well, Jesus is arrested. I'm going to cut a little bit of this short because I feel like I'm supposed to. Jesus is arrested. He doesn't talk at his trial because he won't resist. He will not resist the government that's passing judgment on him. When the government says, "Why aren't you answering?" he doesn't answer. But when they say, "I command you to answer," guess what Jesus does? He answers. And then Pontius Pilate says, "Don't you know I could end you right now?" And Jesus says, "Yes, because God gave you that authority." Whew. Okay. And how far does Jesus submit? How far does the wormhole go? He lets them kill him. How far does God want us to submit to authority? God himself let a bad government kill him. Now, God still gets the final say, wouldn't you say? But he let him do it. So, after all of this, I hope that we understand our weapon. And I hope desperately that we choose to use it. I really do. But some of you may have a question hanging over your mind. Well, God judged Egypt. We saw it, the 10 plagues. And he actually, the final judgment that God gives on Egypt is specifically taking of the firstborn. That is God's actual final judgment. He says that you are to tell Pharaoh that because he won't let my firstborn go, I'm going to take his. That's God's actual final judgment on Egypt. And we see his final judgment on Saul as well, right? But Rome, they don't really seem to be too bothered by the death of Jesus. What judgment did God give them? Well, as I was questioning that, I realized God did pass judgment on Rome. A powerful judgment, and he did it right there on the cross. He said, "Forgive them." God's judgment on Rome was forgiveness. Doesn't God always show us a better way? We expected bad judgment on the Egyptians, and we plotted when their first children were taken because now the Israelis are free, and we were happy when Saul died on a sword, but God is still here to show us a better way. Forgive them. That was God's judgment on Rome. Forgive them. Not because they deserved it, because none of us do either. But forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. If you do have a bitterness against this government or the one that came before it or the Congress or your bosses, folks, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They're the world. The world doesn't know how to act like our kingdom because they're not a part of it. Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And let's keep loving people because that's what we were asked to do. Amen.